And good afternoon, everybody. Steve Schmidt with The Warning, and I am delighted this afternoon to be joined by the one and the only Joanna Coles, Chief Content Officer at the Daily Beast, host of the Daily Beast podcast. Joanna, how are you? In defense of myself, I have been living out of a suitcase and am just home and have a mountain of laundry and bags to go to the dry cleaners and I have to pick up. But I promise you, when we are on together to talk about His Majesty's visit, I may even be in black tie.
I hope so. I hope
I
so
will be
because
sartorially splendid, or as
I
best I can do.
I think that he has heard the warning and he's coming regardless. I think you should take his visit as a personal reprimand, Steve. He's still coming on a state visit. He arrives on the 28th of April, and you will, I'm assuming, with Save America, be beaming out your ad campaign to
We
embarrass and
will,
humiliate.
we will, we will be engaged in welcoming His Majesty, and of course, a subject of His Majesty, and a member of the Order of the British Empire, an OBE.
Correct, which I picked up from Buckingham Palace from his son, Prince William, in a wonderful royal. It's a wonderful royal sort of occasion actually, and I was not particularly looking forward to it, but I went because I knew my parents would be
Mhm.
excited to go to Buckingham Palace and my children. I have two sons. My two sons were particularly impressed because Harry Kane, then captain of the English team, was also picking up an honour. So they really spent the whole time hanging out with Harry and obviously ignoring me because they're teenage boys. Well, they were teenage boys. Then why would they want to hang out with their mom? But it's a strangely somber and rather moving occasion. And Prince William, as he pinned on the medal, which they do in a very clever way. So you have a little kind of hook put on your outfit just before you go and meet the member of the
Mhm.
family who's going to give it to you. So there's no question it's not going to work and they're not trying to
Well,
stab
they've
you.
been doing it for a long time.
They have been doing it
So
for a long
you mean,
time.
no, okay, so,
But it
and,
could have been Andrew. It could have been Andrew,
right.
right, reaching for an area I wouldn't want Andrew to reach for. Anyway, Prince William, knowing that I was a former editor of Cosmo, said, I've read a few issues of Cosmopolitan myself. I rather enjoyed them. So that was kind of fun. But I'm excited for your campaign. Tell me what's going to be happening when
We're gonna be working on it, putting it together. The king has made a mistake coming to the United States on this state visit, and he's made Trump today today attacked the Royal Navy yet again. It's unseemly, it's appalling, and the King of England shouldn't stand for it. But as an American, the King of England shouldn't be standing with an American fascist in the 250th anniversary year of our independence, which was led by a person who was able to establish the country because of his incredible acts of humility.
hmm
We were very lucky historically that when George Washington came along, he did not have the type of ambitions that Donald Trump seems to have. And so we'll have to talk about these things. I do have one question. Are you a lady now with an OB?
Sadly not.
No,
Sadly not, Steve.
you're
No.
not called a lady, Joanna, or any of that.
I'm not a dame. I'm not a
No.
lady. I'm working on it. What can I say? What can I say, Steve? But
Okay.
what do you think about one thing I think is pretty interesting? First of all, there's your ad campaign, which is going to be very
Hmm.
interesting. Also, now President Ro Khanna has stepped forward and said he
Yeah.
would like the King and the Queen, Camilla, to meet the Epstein victims. They've
Yeah.
professed a lot of interest in the victims. Obviously, the elephant in the room is Andrew, formerly known as Prince, which Charles is now being heckled about when he goes out and about in London, which is really a change. This has not happened until recently. So it's the Epstein issue is a real issue for the king, and I'm very curious. Obviously, they've said no, it's a state visit. We don't have time to meet the victims. This is not the right environment for us to meet them. But it would be interesting if they agreed to carve out just an hour from a 3-day schedule to meet them.
It would be, but they won't, for the reasons that you just said. But it could be the case that the king and Andrew and Ghislaine and Epstein are all broadcast together up on Freedom Tower and the Empire
Oh,
State Building and
oh,
other
interesting.
places. Yes. No, it's an appalling decision. It's an appalling political decision by
I'm very
Starmer's
excited.
labor government to put the king in the position. But look, and we're going to talk about it today. I'm curious about how, when you're sitting around at the Daily Beast, and I can't look away from it. It's incredible. It's incredibly curated for this moment, and you sit there and you read the content of the Daily Beast, and I check myself after each story. I'm like, is this real? Is this real? Can this be real? Is
Right.
this like, has someone slipped in a faux Daily Beast, right, story? Is this some type of deep fake? But your excellent investigative reporter Tom Latcham, he's got a story about the head of the Border Patrol, Michael Banks. This guy, it turns out he's a sex tourist. So
He,
he's one of these guys. And if you've ever traveled to Asia for business or around Asia, you see these guys on the plane, that are alone, that are going over, to Thailand, to Bangkok, to wherever, to do the sex tourism. And you can pick them out, not all of them out, but you can pick a bunch of them out pretty easy on the plane. But this is what this guy's doing over there, the head of the U.S. Border Patrol. It's an incredible story.
it's an insane story in an already insane week for Christy Noem. We had her husband yesterday, a remarkable story in the Daily Mail about a particularly bespoke fantasy, I guess you could call it, where this is Brian Noem, Kristi Noem's husband, and I'll come on to Michael Banks in a minute. But I was the editor of Cosmo, as I said earlier, and I didn't know about this thing called loonification or looning, where you get sexually aroused by balloons. I can barely say it. I'm not
I've never.
him because each to his own. Who hasn't, Steve? Who hasn't at a children's party taken a balloon, rubbed it either on their hair or on their sweater, and then stuffed it up their sweater? Who hasn't done that? But I think most people did it when they were under the age of 10. But it turns out that Brian Noem is a local consumer of party supplies and blows up balloons, sticks them up his sweater to mimic enormous breasts, possibly sort of echoing the MAGA women that he's been surrounded by. He
Mhm.
takes the ties on the breast to align them so they look like nipples. And then he wears very tight shorts or tight tights. And what I'm curious about is how you go from doing that in the privacy of your own bedroom or your bathroom to going online and doing it, because that then puts it out into the world. He had 3 women that he would visit regularly. He spent over $25,000 on looning with them, communal looning, commulooning, perhaps. I think there could be a new word out of this.
I
And
have to. I'm gonna.
yeah, go
Can you?
ahead.
You're the Can you spell the word? Can you spell
Looning.
the word? The word is spelled. What is the word?
Looning, Looning, from balloon.
Looning.
Yeah, it's the
Looning.
verb of, I guess you could call it
To
balloon.
loon.
Yeah, to loon. I loon, you
To
loon,
loon.
loon, we loon. He really loons.
He
So
loons.
I
He
don't,
loons.
and I don't mean to laugh about someone's, as I think of it, as bespoke tendencies, because, God knows what people get up to. No judgment. But
He's not ashamed by it. He's not wearing a disguise or a mask. He had his number out. He said he's going to talk more about it. I mean, it's his thing.
well,
I I think you use the word insane, right? The like to go into the Border Patrol story and in this. And so I think about this all the time. When you wake up in the morning to engage the day with find the discovery of whatever it is Trump has said overnight, and I'll be into the daily beast early. I think it's objectively true. Wherever your politics were 8 years ago, 15 years ago, 25 years ago, imagining any of this would not have seemed possible. Would not, whatever was going on in society, and there's all sorts of depravity that existed back then. There are serial killers and corruption and all sorts of craziness. But what is it about this moment? What is it about the insanity that you're observing that makes it unique, that's special to this moment in time? I can't. I no one can convince me that we're not in some uncharted territory, some undiscovered country with this stuff. How do you relate to it?
Well, it's a very good question because you could say, why is anybody's own sexual pleasure? Why is this? Why does it matter to any of us? Everybody's entitled to a private life. Why it matters is because he was married to the head of Homeland Security, a department set up after 9/11 to keep this country safe, to keep everybody, every single American safe.
Hmm.
And when you have someone like that in your family who's eminently blackmailable, it becomes a security issue. In the same way that the head of border security, whose very job it is to protect, um, is to make sure there is no sex trafficking going on in the US. It's then doubly frickin' weird when he turns out to be a sex tourist who is bragging about it to his colleagues. He left in 23. Kristi Noem bought him back in January 25. And he is bragging that this is what he likes to do. He wants to take colleagues with him to Colombia and to Thailand to pay, young girls to have endless sex with him. And again, it's blackmailable, and these are the people in charge. And I think what's different is, it's been referred to alternately as the idiocracy or the moronocracy, but you have a cabinet of people who know they would not have jobs with any other president because they shouldn't be doing these jobs. Christy Noem should never have been put in charge of the security of every American citizen. She wasn't up to the job. Nobody did proper background checks on her because they would have found out about her husband. Perhaps they knew about him. Perhaps that's one of the reasons that she actually left when she did. But these are not serious people, and we are definitely living in different times.
That's such a startling statement when you slow it down. The security of every single American. I grew up in North Plainfield, New Jersey, which was 25 miles from New York City. And so you stood on a speed bump in North Plainfield, New Jersey. You could see the top of the World Trade Center. And any little rise, any little hill, you could see the antenna, you could see the building. For the life of me, we live in a time where, within living memory, We're still in the middle of our careers, our work life, and I wasn't 17. I was 30 years old when the towers came down. I'm 55 years old. 20 all it took was 25 years watching those planes hit into those buildings, and the country was okay with making that imbecile
Mm.
the Secretary of Homeland Security. And you're right about the blackmail. And it's another thing, I mean, about her deductive uh, reasoning capabilities. I guess, she's supposed to figure out or be at the top of a chain of command, figuring out where the terror attack's coming from. But, she can't figure out why Byron's got a giant helium tank in the garage.
That's hilarious.
Right.
Also, this
Byron, why are all these balloons in the kitchen
when are we
drawer? Like,
having a
Jesus
party?
Christ,
When are
why?
we having the party for?
Where
Right.
the fuck are all these balloons in the drawer?
bulk bulk bought party supplies. But can we just point out that the head of Homeland Security, and this should have been an omen for all of us, within the first month of accepting the job, had her handbag stolen from a burger restaurant in Washington, D.C., which there was a large chunk of cash in it, which was interesting too, because who carries cash these days? I literally can't think of the last time any of us have carried cash.
You can't even get cash.
You can't even get cash. Well, you can't
You
because you're a man on the move.
you
Um,
can get like if you like what's the most you can get out like in cash, right? Like $800, like $1,000, right? I mean, it's tough to get a lot of cash out of the machine, even going to the bank. And she's got how much in her
yeah,
purse?
I think she had $3,000 in
Mhm.
cash, which
Right.
it's not 50K, but $3,000
Right.
is a lot to carry around in a handbag. And then
It's
your handbag
shady.
gets stolen. You are the head of Homeland Security and you can't keep your handbag. That is not a good sign.
Mm-mm.
It's just not a good sign.
No.
And of course, she left her blanket and her bag on the plane with her
Yeah.
alleged lover. Of course, she and Corey Lewandowski deny that
Yes.
they've been having an affair, but it seems to be an open secret in DC. And certainly his family talked to the New York Post and said that Brian Noem's family talked to the New York Post and said they don't understand why the couple are still married because of this very public affair with Corey Lewandowski, which Christy Noem denies. But then they said that Brian, he of the looning, bespoke, um, self-pleasuring, um, he saw as his calling from God to support Christy Noem. So there's a lot going on there, and this is the head of Homeland Security, and as we've just said, her job is to protect every single American. I'm not sure how much attention was being paid to her job.
What's one thing that's really surprising to me is when you consider all the tackiness of the Trumps and the desecration of the Oval Office, all the gold leaf, the portraits. When you look at the design that Kristi Noem came up with for Air Fuck One, she may be the best decorator of the whole group, by far, because that plane is nice in the interior. If I was going to get a private jet, I would consider letting her decorate it. I mean, it was a beautiful interior job. What she and Corey had picked out for themselves, that Mark Wayne Mullen, I guess, is going to be flying around in. But
Well, he'll probably add some cruder touches, maybe some mats for him to do his exercise. But
so
I am very surprised that there hasn't been a bigger outcry in her use of the $250 million spent on her ad campaign with her riding
yeah,
around with her full hair extensions, her eyelash extensions in front of Mount Rushmore, a hallowed place in this country's history, Mount Rushmore. $250 million of taxpayers' money. That's money you and I have paid into the system. All the people watching and listening to this live podcast have paid into the system for Christy Noem to ride around on a horse in full glam, telling people who probably aren't ever going to watch this ad campaign not to come here because she and Donald Trump will send them back on their merry way. And really what it was, as Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana pointed out, was it was the beginning of her presidential campaign. It was all about her. And now I wonder if the looning husband makes her more famous. And actually, that's a good thing, because we've discovered with Donald Trump that nothing is unqualifiable to be president. Or if actually, like the gentleman said in Sean McCreish's piece in the Times today, I don't believe this stuff. It's AI. He was a good farm boy when we grew up together.
No, she's done. She served her last
So because people
her
said that
last.
after her book came out where she described shooting her puppy, and everybody was like,
Yeah.
well, that's terrible. And then they put her in charge of Homeland Security, where it
Well,
turns out her people shoot American
well,
citizens.
so that's the interesting thing about this era. So you're using the words they and them to talk about they and them. Put her in charge,
Well,
and I'm gonna.
Donald Trump then.
Well, no. Well, I'm gonna agree with the they and the them, being that you had 7 Democrats who voted to confirm Kristi Noem to be Department of Homeland Security head, and you had another 7 that didn't vote at all. And this matters because there were a bunch of these cabinet secretaries. Tulsi Gabbard falls in this category. Robert Kennedy falls in this category.
Yep.
Pete Hegseth absolutely falls in this category, and Christy Noem falls in this category. And frankly, I think that there were 4 of them together that are grouped like grapes on a stem, and that's Kennedy, Gabbard, Noem, and Hegseth. And what was required in that moment, I think, was for Chuck Schumer to say, I appreciate that I'm in the minority here, but I'm gonna there won't be a pain-free day here. If you try to jam it through with these 4, right? Not going to permit this guy to be the defense secretary, not going to permit her to be the Homeland Security secretary. And when you kind of step back from the whole entirety of the tenure, and you get to now where we are with the husband, you just sit there and you say, "Oh my God, the freak show of this."
The freak.
And they're not the only ones in this cabinet, right? The corruption and everything else. And when you talk about this ad campaign, $220 million ad campaign that threw off $33 million in fees, and we don't know where that money is. So we do know, because of the Daily Beast reporting, a lot of information about this ad campaign that we didn't know about. And now there's been some other additional reporting. But between the first report and today, the thing that we know now is that there's $33 million in cash that sloughed off of this that somebody got. And we know what the vehicle was that distributed that cash. And so now you look at something, I'm divorced, remarried, but you go through a divorce. Any money that came back to Christy Noem through this is gonna be discoverable in a divorce proceeding.
Well, that's interesting.
Right?
They may not get divorced. They may.
Right, and maybe they won't. Right, but that's another consideration with this, with this bizarreness. The second thing is that you pointed out, which, to bring it back to, which is that, where do you step across that line that this becomes something that's inside your head, to I'm doing this, to I'm going to do this in public, to I'm doing this in public with your wife being the most reviled cabinet secretary, you're doing it with an illegal person in the country illegally. It's extraordinary. The recklessness, the lack of judgment, the circus of all of these people.
Well, and I mean, if you were a Freudian analyst, you would say that she was doing it on purpose, that this was some way of getting back at his wife by doing the very thing that would potentially humiliate her the most, right? I mean, the thing that I am still surprised about when you mention the $33 million that gets siphoned off as the fee for booking all the ad time is that people aren't more angry about this. This is taxpayers' money. This is the money that people pay every month, every year to the tax department, to the IRS, and this is what people are doing with it. They've got their hand in the till. I'm not saying it's Christy Noem. I don't know who has taken the commission there, but I am gobsmacked that people aren't more angry that this is where their that this is where their tax dollars are going. I mean, it should be going to protect Americans, right? And instead it's going on a ludicrous ad campaign that the people it's aimed at will probably never see. And yet the people who are making the campaign, the people who are booking the ad time in the campaign, get to walk off with substantial fees.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. We when we did our first thing together, I said that I thought Trump's approval level would be at about 30% by the end of March. And here we are, and he's at about 30%.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like what you're talking about is when you see something, every time you read it in the morning, you're by yourself. And I know that I do. I have a intellectual reaction to it. I have a psychological reaction to it, right? And you sit there and you're like, why aren't people screaming in the streets about this? But it's certainly the case that people don't support it. And you have an enormous percentage of the population of Trump voters, judging by the polls, have peeled off. That despite what my judgment of them may be, they've come to the conclusion that, hey, I didn't vote for this.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're off of it. I'm not sure that people have accepted it. I just don't know that people know what they can do about it in this instant. But the level of corruption and the brazenness of the taking, there are a lot of people who have made a bet. And Kristi Noem is one of those people. And I would argue that she placed the bet on the wrong side of the line. Her bet was that I can do the shit that Trump does. I can do the same level of scamming, and when I get called out on it and I get exposed for it, I can display the same level of defiance. And Trump is Trump. We'll put him in a different category for now. But all these other people below this, including the son-in-law and the business deals in the Middle East, and then this becomes about politics in the future, because I think that whomever the next Democratic president is, I really want to know before the voting, before the primary, who that person intends to have sitting in the Roosevelt room on January 21st to receive the Emirati ambassador and the Saudi ambassador with pads and pens to start writing the names down of every person they did a corrupt deal with in the United States, starting with the people that were in the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is staggering, but you got a whole country full of scammers. There are estimates that the COVID relief, that up to $1 trillion of that was stolen, was scammed. And nobody knows what a trillion is. It's an incomprehensible number.
Mhm.
And so if I were to say to you, just so people can get a frame around it, if I were to say to you, I'm gonna see you in 1 million seconds, Joanna, that means we talk again in 12 days. If it doesn't go well and I'm like, we'll see you in 1 billion seconds, right? That's 32 years from now. 1 trillion seconds is 33,000 years from now.
Wow.
That's the difference between 1 million and 1 billion and 1 trillion. And the Saudis have given Jared Kushner billions of dollars. And the Saudis are on the outside saying, no, 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 we don't like the war, but are cheerleading Trump to drop bombs. The entirety of the corruption is mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling.
It's
But
shocking.
people latch on to the thing that they can understand, right? That they can understand the scheme, right? There's a lot of Ocean's 11 movies, right? Ocean's 9, Ocean's, right? You got to know what the robbery is. You got to understand what the heist is. And so I think it's going to take a while for people to fully comprehend with regard to Trump the degree and the scale of the heist.
Well, I'm
But
not
it's
sure.
but it's staggering.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. To your point, it's very hard for people to comprehend the level of the grift. Um, and also the other thing that's interesting, and this is apparently one of the reasons that Christy Noem lost her job, though who knows, I'm sure there were, well, certainly there were myriad reasons for her to lose her job, was that Trump didn't like the idea that someone had been skimming the top of this ad campaign, because Trump likes to be in on the grift himself. He doesn't mind his family being in on the grift, but he doesn't want other people being in on the grift, and he doesn't like them grifting off him, which is an interesting one for the people around him because they're all opportunists. We saw this week that the FT ran a story saying that Pete Hegseth broker had reached out because it appeared that he wanted to buy shares in companies that would be,
Yeah.
would be hugely benefited by a sudden invasion somewhere. And of course, his office, well, oddly, Sean Duffy, his former colleague from Fox News, and let's remember that Pete Hegseth, it's always worth remembering that Pete Hegseth was a weekend co-host on Fox News before he was given one of the biggest and most important government departments in the world to run. The entire US military is responsible. He's responsible for that he was looking to make money out of it too. This grotesque greed and opportunism that this particular cabinet seems to be their uniting force. If they had one thing that held them together, that appears to be it.
If there's a single story that over the last week if there was a national siren, a national bell,
Right.
right? If it was like the old days, stop the presses, extra, extra, extra. This is the story. And it's like you got to take a deep breath. You're like, so you're saying the Secretary of Defense on the edge of launching military action has his private financial guy reaching out, in this case to BlackRock, to see if he can get in on a bunch of defense funds that are going to do very well, because among things that most people don't know, that Hegseth knew by that time, didn't know when he got the job, but we don't have a lot of these munitions that were running through like a fire sale in Iran. Certainly don't have what we need to fight a war in the Western Pacific. And so out of our $1.5 trillion defense budget, which we can't pass an audit at the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth knows that there's going to be a lot of expenditures in a group of companies, and he wanted in on the war profiteering, and that's what it is. And Harry Truman, famous name, great president, but Harry Truman was a World War I combat officer who becomes a senator from the state of Missouri and becomes famous in the late 1930s and the 1940s as the head of the Truman Committee. And the Truman Committee was designed to stop the profiteering, to stop the corruption. But you haven't seen this type of corruption in the United States that you're seeing now since then. And the worst part about it is the man primarily responsible for the creation of the American Army as it exists today, George Marshall, who served as Secretary of State, who served as Secretary of Defense, Army Chief of Staff, really principal architect of the building of the Army that wins World War II. When George Marshall was retired from government service, Marshall would not so much as take a board seat in the private sector, lest he be accused out of government service of having tried to monetize his public service. And so I don't know where you go with all of this stuff, other than to say maybe in the curriculum starting in kindergarten we ought to reintroduce the concept of ethics in this country.
Well,
But it's astonishing.
yeah, it's a really, really good point. And when you bring up Marshall like that, and you think of public servants who really did believe in working for a larger cause and not making it about themselves, and it's really fascinating whether or not actually come the next election, come the midterms, which even the Republicans think they're going to get wiped out in.
Yeah.
There is a swing back to, no, we want decent people. We don't want this faux transparency, which we get with Trump. We want actual transparency into what's going on. And you know, the Pete Hegseth story should be a 5-alarm bell fire. But we've also got this morning, you know, the justices listening to Donald Trump's chief litigator, John Sauer, arguing that what has been, you know, what is part of the Constitution is no longer working for him with birthright citizenship. And Trump himself has gone to the Supreme Court to bring that lumbering body of his to use as a physical representation and metaphorically to show his opposition to the idea that children, that babies who are born here deserve American citizenship. So this sense of total disruption, total throwing everything we take for granted, the 14th Amendment, and tossing it on its head because he can. It's also interesting how he frequently is losing at the moment and just carries on regardless. It's like, well, what else can I upturn? And it's impossible not to think of the 5-year-old child just storming around the nursery, throwing things on the floor and seeing what he gets away with. And there's just been so little resistance to him. I mean, Congress seems to have disappeared. The Democrats are, for the most part, silent. They've certainly got some traction with the Epstein files. And there is, of course, an argument that you just keep quiet when your enemy is committing suicide in public. But it would be nice to think there was a more robust governmental response to him.
I think about this all the time, is that nobody has ever told him no.
Mm-hmm.
He has not. He is an 80-year-old man who does not understand the concept of the word no.
You know who's saying no to him? The Iranians are saying no.
Right. And
no.
And it's worked for him.
Mm-hmm. Well,
including losing a presidential election, and there's not one person around him who says you lost.
Well, there were a few people. I want to shout out some sort, there was Brad Rassenberger in Georgia who said, you know what, I'm not going to give you 11,000 votes. There was Mike Pence, actually, a man who didn't,
True enough.
no, didn't believe that you didn't believe that bakers should have to make a cake for a gay couple. But nevertheless, actually, when his one moment, Mike Pence's one moment where he actually had to make the right decision, and very few of us are actually, I mean, most people don't have to make as momentous as a decision as Mike Pence did in that moment, but at least he made the right decision. There were brave Republicans around Trump at the end of Trump won when they knew he hadn't won. Even his family backed away, right? It's why Jared and Ivanka aren't involved and aren't anywhere near him right now, although I guess Jared is a special negotiator, but they're not literally involved in the politics of it. There's far fewer of those people around him now.
Well, I I'm a hardliner on this, and so yes, I stipulate to everything you said about Mike Pence. Do you know in Mike Pence's book he blames me for January 6th because the Lincoln Project ran an ad, and that ad said that on January 6th, Mike Pence is going to put the nail in your coffin. He's the guy. And we ran that so Trump would see it. And Trump saw it. And Trump had the reaction that he had because of the formal procedure that occurs on January 6th. Now,
Right.
in September, I went on one of these shows and I said there's going to be violence. And there's going to be violence because Trump has said it's only a fair election if I win the election.
Right.
And Mike Pence watched him throw the gasoline on the floor, light the match, light it again, light it 500 times, and then the match lit on January 6th. And Mike Pence was faced with a moment of holy shit. Right? This is what John Kennedy talked about the foolish men who seek power by trying to ride the back of the tiger only to wind up inside. And so that was Mike Pence walked as far forward to a line in the wrong that he knew to be the wrong. And he said, "Man, I can't take one more step here." Does that make him a hero? I think it makes him at best like General Choltitz, who was the German commander of Paris, who wouldn't burn it down. A committed Nazi who, in the end, would not take the final step into the abject madness. And before we get to the end of this time, because this time, no one's going to remember really what Trump did in the first term. And I had written about that. It's all a preface. It'd be 3 paragraphs in the obituary. But in this term, you have to hope for people at all places in this government as he moves to the line that I think you fear that he's moving towards, that somebody does what Pence did.
Right.
But these people will never be heroes in my
I'm not saying Mike Pence is a hero. I'm just saying that in the moment he did the
in
right
the
thing.
moment he you know I remember sitting with McCain on the couch in his condo and
One of
watching the
many
TV
eight or
in
nine
in
homes.
2000 and 2008 as the votes were coming in and saying, it's time. It's time.
What, it's time
Time
to concede.
it's time to call Senator Obama. And all the campaigns know. I knew who won the 20 election by midnight. You know, and you have an obligation and you have a duty, and the whole country, the whole republic has been knocked off its axis because of his failure to acknowledge I lost.
Well, he's
And there's nobody in his life, obviously, that can go in and close the door and tell him no.
right. And also we're seeing all the hints now. He's already laying down the defenses to do something around the midterm elections, either to stop them, to send in ICE, to say that they're not going to be valid, so that he reaches that point where he can say either we're not going to have the midterms because I can't, they're not going to be honest, or he sows enough doubt in them, which is all you have to do in a democracy to knock it off its axis, your phrase, to make people think, well, is this a real thing? Is it not a real thing? We know that voter fraud is not an issue in America. Remarkably, it's not an issue at all. And yet he's whipping it up as an issue so that he can make a move potentially on the elections in November, where he may well, at the moment, the way things are looking, you referenced the polls, lose the House and lose the Senate.
I don't. One of the things that for the life of me, I truly I don't understand. Is that you have the Iranian mullahs have a sophisticated enough understanding of information and propaganda. They have their Lego men with Trump, and that's penetrated the culture. Every day, and just spitballing here, I'm going to say the time is about 4 p.m. Right, but by 4 p.m. in the afternoon, the Democrats in Washington should be having some type of event every day of the week responding to the insanities of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. I'm talking about a new set. I'm talking about 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different teams that have some humor, that go out, and every time Trump says there may not be an election, it has to be responded to.
Right.
Every time. And for the life of me, I don't understand why the Democrats don't understand, the leaders, what the Iranians understand. Is that all of this is playing out on a screen somewhere. And it requires you to put forward your narrative. And on the case of the elections, the idea that Trump has it within his power, or that Trump has the power to decide whether we get a say or not, is madness.
Yeah.
And no one ever talks about in the bracket, in the parenthesis of, okay, we'll talk about the hypothetical of Trump tries to cancel the election. Well, what happens next? What happens next? We have 400 million guns in the United States. And Trump's going to declare himself dictator? This is very, very, very dangerous stuff. And I've been in the presence of a couple Democratic members of Congress. I was talking to one Democratic congresswoman. She goes, well, if we have elections in November. I was like, what are you talking about? If we have elections in November? You're a member of Congress. We've had elections through Cold War, Civil War, World War, Great Depression, all manner of recession. No mechanism for there not to be an election. There's going to be an election.
Well, we also had an election after 9/11 in the
Sure
city.
did.
Do you remember that Rudy Giuliani, who very briefly had a great moment where he was America's mayor, and even
Yeah.
he said, grasping for power, which is what people always do when they have power and they don't want to give it up. Oh, goodness, the city is so destabilized. I need to stay an extra year. And people were like, actually, no, the city is destabilized, but we are going to go ahead with the mayoral elections. And he ended up having to, give up power as he should have done after his 2 terms, and he moved on. It's also fascinating to me that when Trump says we're having negotiations with the Iranians and they're going quite well, the Iranians just come out and say, actually, we're not having negotiations. So they're not, well, there's nothing going on. And who knows who is right there? Maybe they are having negotiations. They don't want anybody to know.
I believe the Iranians.
Well, here's the awful thing. I feel like a lot of people feel like they are rooting against Trump to win this, but they do not want to root against America. And that's a weird dilemma he's put people in, that they don't want him to win here, but of course they don't want America to lose. It's a very clever maneuver that I think he has made. But his idea of federalizing the election, and again, just sowing doubt that the states cannot do this for themselves. You're completely right. The Democrats should be fighting back every time he mentions it. The idea that you even contemplate the fact that there might not be elections is extremely dangerous.
It's like being pulled over by a Canadian cop in the middle of Illinois for speeding, right? And the guy says, "Hey, I'm from Ontario. You're speeding." You're like, "Fuck off. You
Right.
have no jurisdiction here." And the federal government doesn't run elections in the United States.
Right. The
And
state.
that's the states do. He just has no authority. And I think on the question of Iran and what's happening on this is that we've had loss. We've had hundreds of Americans wounded. We have had a lot of things blown up. We've had, I think the number is 11 Americans killed. What Donald Trump has set out to do is not achievable. And so now that he's in it, and I've talked about this, it's that if there was one lesson over the last 25 years, that every person in politics with a conscience and any notion of responsibility, if you were sincerely committed to serving the public, and you had some humility of, I appreciate that mistakes have been made over the last 25 years. That I know on my journey from 30-year-old to 55-year-old, from 9/11 to today, right? Maybe my number one takeaway is this. It's a lot easier to start a war than it is to stop one.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're at the place where Trump, not wanting to stop a war, because if he stops the war now, having achieved none of the things he set out to achieve when he started it, people will say Trump lost a war. And Trump would rather drop the 82nd Airborne Division on Iran, on some island, than for somebody on Fox News to say Trump lost a war.
I'm going to push back on that, only because I think that Trump declares victory regardless of it being a victory, and he moves swiftly on. And I think it's very, very plausible that he could, when he speaks to the nation tonight, and who knows what he's going to say, that he declares victory and says it's great, and the Strait of Hormuz will be left to other people who get their oil through there. And as we know, it's 20% of the world's oil passes through there, and that the Europeans need to sort it out, that America's had enough of being the world's policeman. He's gone in, he's decimated, obliterated any kind of danger in Iran. We're pulling out. We've lost, I think, 16 lives at this point. And that he's ready to move on to the next thing. The bigger challenge, I think, is that he promised to his MAGA base, no more forever wars, no more wars.
Yeah.
And he has taken, in addition to American lives, and all the soldiers on their way, the military on their way steaming still to the Gulf. How much has this cost? Money that could have been spent in America rebuilding infrastructure, rebuilding hospitals, rebuilding schools for kids. And this willful spending of, again, our taxpayer dollars in a war that every president preceding him has decided against doing because they really can't see a way through it, is just shocking. And again, I'm just astonished that people aren't more concerned about where the money they are earning and paying into the government goes.
I would just say, I think he's going to try to do all of those things. I think that your analysis of how he operates is 100%. It's spot on, and it has worked like a drunk who drives home from the bar every night for many years without incident. It's worked until it didn't work. And what's not going to work here is that the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And the US Navy does not have freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. And world oil prices are a function of not where the oil comes from, but its total price on the global market, which is impacted mightily by the closure of a place where 20% of it flows through. So the economic impact is going to be immense. And while Trump says, hey, we've won or we're winning, the reality is people are going to experience the economic shock. And in the end, the delta between what's real, what's plausible, and is fantasy is just too much here. I hope you are right, that he will say we've won, that's it, no ground troops, and we'll go back and we'll have a series of crises to deal with for many years because of this debacle, but the worst will have been avoided, and the worst is Marine Expeditionary Units and airborne forces being dropped on the Iranian coast to take possession of these islands, these terminals, these airports, these holding facilities. And Trump is so all over the place, changes 3 times a day. He's, for this, we've won, we've lost, I'm going to do it. You have Lindsey Graham, bloodthirsty as hell. Then he's in Disney World with his Little Mermaid bubble wand, which brings it back right full circle to the total insanity of everything we've talked about for the course of the year.
Well, it brings us back to children's toys. I think we started with balloons, and now we're ending with Lindsey Graham's Little Mermaid.
Yep. Well, we're at the end of our hour. It went fast. Let me first off let's do some business stuff here. Thank you everybody for spending the time and watching. And if you can, a must subscribe is to Primal Scream with Joanna Coles on Substack. Go find that. It's terrific. Subscribe to the Daily Beast. I'm on to the Daily Beast within a few minutes every morning. It gets my blood pressure going and up for sure, but the content's incredible, and it really gives you a full measure of the mosaic of the madness, and the charting of the madness is so important. If you can, everybody subscribe to The Warning. If you can, be a paid member, and to the Save America movement. We have a lot of great things going on in opposition to that. thesaveamericamovement.org. Thank you all very much for taking time out of your day. The one and only Joanna Coles, who's going to keep bringing you the news over at the Daily Beast, and there is much news to be brought. Thank you, everybody, very much for joining.